This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The man who created a global investment empire and has the ears of presidents. The billionaire philanthropist. Now, a crisis no one has faced before. What would he do?
When I started my career, I thought things would always go wrong. You always have to assume something bad is going to happen to you. Always having a lot of extra money around.
How should you gain from his experience?
I think if you take this approach, your businesses are always fine when things are terrible for everyone else.
Meet Stephen Schwarzman, founder and CEO of Blackstone. Only on BizTalk, only on CGTN. Hello and welcome to BizTalk. I'm Talay in Beijing. As we try to get our heads around the relentless battering that is the coronavirus pandemic, it helps to hear from someone who's made a career out of stress tests and guided his business through crises. Joining us today from New York is Mr. Stephen Schwarzman. He's the co-founder and CEO of Blackstone, one of the world's top investment firms. He is also a power broker and the author of the best-selling book, What It Takes. Welcome to the show, Mr. Schwarzman.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So, you expect the pandemic to wipe out about $5 trillion, or about a quarter of the US economy. Now, does the stock market seem to be reflecting that extent of pain?
Well, the stock market is basically being supported and bridged by massive US government spending, as well as the support from our central bank, the Federal Reserve. The philosophy that our government has taken is that all of the missing revenue that people would normally get as a result of the pandemic suppressing that revenue, that the government's got to provide the bridge to help people and businesses get to the other side so we can restart our economy.
You're not worried about that ballooning in the US Fed balance sheet?
We can take that up a lot further and still be in line with most major countries in the world. Before the financial crisis in 2008, we only had $800 billion in the central bank as a balance sheet, and Citibank had 3.6 trillion. So we can expand it very significantly and not be out of balance.
Mr. Schwarzman is a key advisor to President Trump. He also enjoys high-level friendships in China. He was actively involved in the China-US trade negotiations, but now the pandemic has brought new complications. You've played a key role in bringing China and the US together on a phase one trade deal. Is that going to be jeopardized because of the pandemic?
Well, I think the pandemic has diverted both the Chinese side and the US side from doing anything further. As you know, everybody in the world has just been simply internally focused. And because of that, the idea that there'd be further progress in the short term, in terms of trade negotiations, is very low.
I'm fascinated by your ability to befriend and gain the trust of leaders from all different countries with different values and beliefs, politicians from both sides of the aisle. How do you do that?
It's pretty easy, actually. You just look at what they're thinking or the problems they're facing, and you try and help them. Everybody likes somebody who they feel understands them, who's in effect on their team.
Even if you don't agree with them?
Well, you have to see life from their point of view. And if you think their point of view isn't going to work, and you can explain it quickly, and they know you're looking at it from their perspective, you're not opposing them, And what I find is that most leaders, they actually just want to be successful. And if they're not being as successful as they want, showing them how to change, and they'll often, not always, they will often change the way they're approaching something if they think ultimately it will get them the kind of outcome that they're looking for.
The president's go-to business advisor didn't make it overnight. When Blackstone was first established as a boutique M&A firm, Schwarzman and his co-founder Pete Peterson pounded pavements to raise funds. There were also mistakes, a $330 million investment in Edgecombe Steel. After that, Schwarzman began collective decision-making and criticism-only risk assessment, involving even the most junior analysts. Schwarzman claims that only one Blackstone-owned portfolio company from over 700 investments has gone bankrupt over the past 15 years. Blackstone now invests in everything from energy to technology to entertainment. The latest foray in biotech is a $2 billion financing partnership with Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Is the pandemic, though, going to fundamentally change our economies, or at least parts of it?
Well, I think the pandemic will change parts of our economy. I think supply chains around the world are going to be modified somewhat. I don't know how radical that's going to be, but somewhat, because people simply in one part of the world have had trouble getting supply from other parts of the world when borders are closed. They realize they have to diversify to a greater extent supply chains and particularly locate more things in their own country. May mean that growth in the future will be disproportionate in their own countries, even if the price is higher.
So is there any specific industry that you think will be more sensitive to this process?
In particular, countries are very sensitive now about medicines and how they get medicines and give them to their population. And to the extent that those medicines come from all over the world, they'll probably want to locate more in their own country. Healthcare system will be enhanced in almost every country, which provides a lot of economic opportunities to a company like Blackstone.
So how is Blackstone going to capitalize on those opportunities? Are you going more into healthcare?
Well, we started going into healthcare and have been in it for years, but we made a major decision about 2.5 years ago to become extremely large in that business. And we bought a company, it's now called Blackstone Life Sciences, that does testing and develops drugs. This is an enormously successful operation for us, and we're looking to expand more. And we're going to see a lot of opportunities with this explosion of needs that each country is now sensitive have to be met. Investment opportunities range all over. First, you have to pick your country. Then you have to pick your asset class within the country. And if you can pick the right place to invest in that capital structure, you can deploy a lot of money.
.360-degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. BizTalk, only on CGTN.
This low-key Bauhaus-style building is Blackstone's headquarters in New York. Blackstone is the largest alternative asset manager in the world, with more than $500 billion of assets under management. Investments are spread across real estate, private equity, hedge funds, and credit. Getting quality and low-priced assets from each crisis is a Blackstone hallmark. And now, Blackstone is ready to break out. Back to looking for investment opportunities. We know that valuations have taken a beating, a lot of balance sheets are struggling. What are the metrics that you look at when you're trying to find opportunities through crises?
That's a great question. There are companies that come in all different piles, if you will. There are some that are doing quite well now. The opportunities there are in a lot of different areas. First, you have to pick your country as to what's going on. Then you have to pick your asset class within the country. So, for example, warehouses were, I guess now we're either the second largest or the largest in the world, are doing great because people use these warehouses for staging areas for a lot of the digital economy. And you know, everybody's ordering things at home and they get delivered, and you need a warehouse to do that. And so if those values are depressed, because everything is depressed, then we can make some very good buys on a long-term basis with those. If you look at things like hotels, you just have to figure out when's it going to start. Do those hotels benefit?
Generally speaking, when you look for investment opportunities, what questions do you always ask yourself?
In a way that you have to look at investments in different piles. The ones that are shut, in a way, is a bit of a calculation. When will they start? How much money do they need to stay alive before they start? And if you want to put that money in to a company, do you do it up in the senior part of the debt area to make sure if something goes wrong, you'll be controlling that company? Or do you want to put it in as stock? And if it's as stock at the bottom of the capital structure, that can reflect improvements very, very quickly, particularly if it's a public company. And so the investment opportunities range all over.
And opportunities are popping up in securities as well?
There's also an enormous opportunity now with securities of all these kinds of companies, both debt securities as well as stocks that have collapsed or have half collapsed or have only 10% collapsed. And if you look at those and figure out where the best value is and where things are safe when somebody else doesn't, there's an opportunity to deploy very large amounts of money safely. In addition, for capital structures that exist, in other words, somebody else had bought something, they've issued different debt securities. There are enormous opportunities at huge scale within those debt securities, from the most conservative near the top of the capital structure down to the bottom where it's more risky. And if you can pick the right place to invest in that capital structure, you can deploy a lot of money. For example, in 3 weeks in the United States, some of those securities, debt securities, went from being worth 100 cents on the dollar to 30 cents.
Wow.
It's the same asset. Can you imagine?
That's insane.
So if you had bought that, at the bottom at 30 cents, in another 3 weeks, it went back to 60 cents. And so there's all kinds of interesting things. But then to do that, you have to know exactly what that group of real estate assets is going to be worth when things actually get better.
The 2008 financial crisis bolstered Blackstone's position on Wall Street. Shortly before the mayhem erupted, Schwarzman sensibly heard what he calls discordant notes. Blackstone went public in 2007, valuing the firm at $33.6 billion. China's sovereign wealth fund invested $3 billion just prior to the offering. The IPO helped Blackstone weather the storm and finance its big bet on the post-crisis housing market recovery in the US. Fast forward to first quarter 2020, Blackstone just completed a 2-year fundraising cycle of nearly $250 billion with a $150 billion cash coffer. Right now, it seems it's a simultaneous global stress test, especially for leadership at the corporate and the government levels. So what are you drawing on to lead Blackstone through this time?
Well, I've been through probably, I don't know, probably
7
6
crises.
of these sort of quasi collapses from the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, to the collapse of the internet companies in 2001, to the real estate recession in the United States in 1992. We've been through the Asian financial crisis. I could go on, and I'm still here, and our company is still quite prosperous.
That's a lot of crises. How did you make it through all of that?
The first thing is you always have to assume something bad is going to happen to you. Not that it will, but you have to plan for it, and you never take a risk that can't survive something bad happening. I have a saying that bad things can happen to nice people, and they do. I was very fortunate. I started in finance in the late 1960s. Everything collapsed. I went to business school. I came back, and for 10 years, there was no increase in equities. In my third year, there was a big recession. And so when I started my career, I thought things would always go wrong because that was my experience. So if you started in around 1980, if you were lucky enough, it's when China had its economic miracle starting, and the US had a great run starting in 1982, you would think the world was always pretty good. And so you wouldn't prepare, and you wouldn't be safe the way someone who had the luck of starting in a bad time was used to.
In your experience, what are the most important things that make you successful?
So the first thing you do is you make sure by having large bank lines, good relationships with your financial institutions, having the ability to be in businesses that can reduce costs, and always having a lot of extra money around. And the reason you want the extra money is, one, to protect your business, but also to take advantage of opportunities which occur, because when people don't have the same conservatism, if you will, or paranoia that someone like myself does, when the world gets bad, it's really terrible for them, and there are great things to buy, but they can't do them. And so that's why the great entrepreneurial companies in the world, started by people sort of more or less like me, whether it's Alibaba or Tencent or Microsoft or Berkshire Hathaway, always has these huge amounts of cash. And they have it because the entrepreneurs, they know that having a lot of money around is a good thing. Financial analysts always criticize them for having too much money around, but that's because they don't understand at some point you may really need it, not just for your own survival, but to take advantage. And I think if you take this approach, your businesses are always fine when things are terrible for everyone else. Because if you like to win, you can't be winning 5 different things at once. It doesn't work that way. That's when you launch. And you launch with every asset you have.
Schwarzman was born in Philadelphia in 1947, where his father ran a successful dry goods store. But Schwarzman's ambitions took him much further. He studied humanities at Yale before starting his career on Wall Street. A stint in the Army and Harvard MBA later, he joined Lehman Brothers and soon found his niche in mergers and acquisitions. There, he met his mentor and later partner, Pete Peterson. The two set up Blackstone together in 1985 with $500,000. Now, aside from having a lot of money around, you've always had a lot of drive. I want to take our viewers back to your 20s because you're one of those people who dreamed big, worked hard, and had that tremendous drive even when, your peers were just having fun. You endured pain through athletic training, ran with a broken wrist, and, you did amazing things at Lehman Brothers in your 20s. What was that about, the son of a curtain store owner that made you the Wall Street titan that you are today?
Question of why I'm like that is something I don't fully understand. In other words, I've always been like that as a child. I always wanted to win whatever was going on. If it was athletics, I always wanted to, we have a sport called baseball where you use a bat and you hit a ball. I always liked to win the game for my team by hitting it the furthest. If it was something involving running, I just had this compulsion to want to win. I don't know exactly where that came from, but I had it, when I was 6 or 8 years old, and I've never changed in that sense. I've become more domesticated, if you will. But once you set an objective, something you really want, you realize that there are sacrifices or pain that goes with that. If it's athletics, you have to train almost till you drop. And I watched people who didn't train hard. They didn't win. And even if you're really gifted, if there's another gifted person who's training and preparing a lot harder, they will beat you because they're better prepared. And I was always aware of that, and I was always looking for some advantage. And I think as you transition from being younger to being an adult, you realize that that ability not to train, prepare, and have psychological strength and emotional strength to sustain setbacks is part of winning.
But not everyone is born like that. So how do you have that winning mentality and that mental toughness?
Another part of winning is setting the table for yourself with a grand plan, with something that's really sound, that other people haven't done. It is worthy of your time. Because what we find is if you like to win, you can't be winning 5 different things at once. It doesn't work that way. Nobody has enough energy. Nobody has enough time. So you have to focus on the 1 or 2 things that are absolutely critical. I call them must-win things. And you have to think about them very carefully. Are they worthy of your time? Are they worthy of your focus? And once you decide, it's almost like a perfect solution to some problem. That's when you launch. And you launch with every asset you have. And you don't worry about failing because you've decided you're gonna succeed in that quest. And then all you have to do is just keep adapting to the objective world that's giving you feedback, but you never give up. You'll find you win a lot more than you lose. And the only other thing with this is we all make mistakes. And part of winning is adapting from learning for those mistakes. Most people don't look at their mistakes. They may pretend they don't happen or they're an accident. They're not an accident. you've done something wrong, or your company has, or the people you're working with has made a mistake. Why? And you have to stop what you're doing, analyze it, fix it, so that problem doesn't happen again.
Learning from mistakes and winning through crises have given Schwarzman a net worth of $17.7 billion, ranking number 64 in the most recent Forbes Rich list. Like other billionaires, wealth attracts populist anger, but it hasn't sidetracked him on the quest to better education worldwide. In 2013, he founded Schwarzman Scholars at Tsinghua University to educate future leaders. He's also given extensively to Oxford, Yale, and MIT. But success draws envy and criticism. Some want to tax the PE industry more, and sometimes you're targeted for your wealth and influence. How do you deal with that?
It's actually a little strange because, you know, I understand the context of the question, but, you know, for my own purpose, you know, I still think I'm trying to become successful and working hard and haven't made the transition from the person I started as, which is regular sort of middle class American from public schools and so forth, to somebody who's accumulated more things.
To say the least.
Yeah, I think it's important to raise the levels, you know, of society economically. And part of the reason you get this kind of targeting is because other people aren't in as good a place as they would like to be economically. And, you know, part of it is not their fault. That sometimes what they do isn't as highly valued economically. So I think we're going to have to increase minimum wages and provide a better living for people. The second thing is that many people, distressingly, have not had the right kind of education. And I was talking with one of the top people in China about 9 months ago, and he was, this government person, was telling me that they were planning on having every student in China is going to have computer science training. Well, that's an amazing asset that China will have. In the West, the number of students who are getting computer science training in elementary and secondary education is probably 5%. The largest I think you'd ever find would be around 10%. So if China is 100% technologically adept and competitive nations are 5 to 10, who is going to have a better life on balance over time economically as a society? Well, it's going to be the one that prepares their people the best, and the people themselves will have much better outcome.
Preparation and people are probably at the heart of what makes Schwarzman successful and Blackstone the behemoth it is today. Preparation for the bad times, being willing and able to solve problems for others and therefore forge strong relationships. Of course, only needing 5 hours of sleep a day helps too. Can Schwarzman lead Blackstone through the toughest crisis yet? Tweet us with your comments at CGTN. I'm Chen Lei for BizTalk. See you at the same time next week.